Here we are again. We're going to look at Numbers chapter 13 today. Numbers chapter 13. In our story today, let me set the context for you. The people of Israel have left Egypt. They had the plagues. They crossed the Red Sea, and God had led them into the desert. They have received the law. It has been given to them at Mount Sinai, and they had left Egypt probably between a year and 2 years, no more than 2 years. They had been out of Egypt and they have been in the desert. They had built the tabernacle, they had celebrated the Passover. So that would be the 1 year anniversary. And this story takes place sometime after that. So that in Numbers 13, Moses, the leader of about 2 million people of, um, of Israel, he has asked the people to appoint one man from each tribe to go into the land that has been promised to them and spy it out. Great technique. Anytime you're going to take over land, you want to make sure that it's possible to do that. I'm not sure it was necessary because God had promised them that he would give the land. And so obviously, God said it would happen. But this is what happened. So they appointed one man from each tribe. There were 12 tribes. Manasseh and Ephraim, the sons of Joseph, take over take over two positions, and Levi is left out. Levi was the priestly tribe, and there was not a representative from the Levites who was appointed to go in as a spy. So there are 12 men. They go in and spy out the land. And as they spy out the land, it looks pretty good. They went all over the land, to the north, to the south, to the east, to the west. They explored the whole thing. They took 30 days to wander around and just check it out. And they saw that it was good fruit. They saw that there was rich soil. They saw that, as promised, it was a land flowing with milk and honey. They had all these wonderful things to bring back as a report on how good. They say a cluster of grapes was found, and it took two men on a pole to bring the cluster of grapes in. Now that's a big cluster of grapes. Usually I hold a cluster of grapes in one hand, but they had to hold them on two guys on one pole. That's pretty impressive. So obviously this was a very fertile land and would be able to supply all of their needs. So as they went around, they came back with the report. The report came back, and this is what they said. It's wonderful land, the people are strong, and the cities are fortified. And they concentrated on the final things. They were asked are the people strong or weak? Are the people many or few? Is the land good or bad? Those are the things that they were asked for. And two out of the three things, the men came back and said, oh, yeah, this is going to be difficult. Think about that for a minute. The report came back in that it was going to be difficult. Compare the difficulty with the promise of God. We know the story of this story. We've heard it before many times. 10 men gave a bad report, a report saying, we shouldn't go in there. They're too strong. We're going to just kill ourselves in trying to attempt to take this land. And two men responded to the faithfulness of God. You know who they are, Joshua and Caleb. Joshua from one of the tribes of Joseph, and Caleb from the tribe of Judah. These two men came back and said, yeah, you're right. The men are strong. The armies are great. The cities are fortified. That's not a problem with God. God clearly was able to fight their battles for them. And so the report of the spies went through. 2 men were willing to stand alone. 2 men were willing to suffer the consequences. 2 men were willing to obey God. 10 men had a lack of faith. 10 men failed to recognize that God is always faithful to his promises. And so the people responded. And the people responded out of fear. The people responded out of a lack of faith. In their fear and lack of faith, they needed to suffer the consequences of that time. It wasn't like they had put it to a vote, but the general populace of the people of Israel chose not to respond to the promises of God. It's important for us to think through today. God has laid out so many promises for us. Promises that he will never leave us. He'll never forsake us. His covenant call upon us to be his child. And so often we need to recognize those promises of God and follow through with those promises in faith and obedience. Faith that God is going to be faithful to his promises. The people of Israel as a whole, the majority, didn't follow after those promises of God. Caleb and Joshua, they did want to follow after the promises. They wanted to lead the people to be faithful. But because the majority led them and the majority ruled, they needed to suffer the consequences along with the whole. It's hard for us sometimes when we face struggles and it wasn't our fault. Joshua and Caleb could easily have said, it's not our fault that we can't go in. Why can't we go in? Sometimes we suffer consequences for the larger decisions of the larger group. That might happen in a political situation. That might happen in a lot of situations where the actions of the many, which are wrong, are not ones that are helpful or nice for the minority who suffer the consequences of those. God allows us to deal with those types of situations frequently in our lives. And Joshua and Caleb had to deal with the consequences as well. However, if we're to jump ahead in the story, Joshua and Caleb were 40 years later able to go into the promised land. And because of their faithfulness in following after God's will for their lives, God gave them each promises that were wonderful. Caleb, as an 80-year-old man, went in and claimed his land because God had told him, the land that you walked on will become yours. And he claimed his land as an inheritance for his children and his children's children. His faithfulness had long-lasting effects for his children. Joshua was the leader, the conqueror, the general who was able to go into the promised land and lead his people. And he had great benefit as well. When we are faithful in following after God, there are promises made to us that God himself will be faithful to us. God may not show us his blessing in this lifetime. Oftentimes he does, but he promises us an eternal reward when we are faithful in following after him. I hope that in this day, we will choose to be faithful to the promises of God and the call of God in our lives. Sometimes it's hard. Sometimes we have to suffer pain and consequences as a result. It might even, for many in history, have led to their death. Suffering is also one of the blessings of God at times, where we suffer for our faith and God blesses us as a result of our suffering for him. There we go. That's our lesson for today. I hope you have a great day.